welcome to the Venture Brothers podcast at Graphic Policy Radio. Sorry for the delay. You may have noticed there was an election. And if you live in Florida or Georgia, there's still an election, and you need to go get your ballot validated. But for the rest of us, welcome back to the show. We are your hosts, Elana Levin, a.k.a. Elana Brooklyn.
And Stephen Atwell.
Hello, Stephen. Welcome back.
Hello.
And you're joining us to have a look at the season finale of Season 7 of The Venture Brothers. The final finale episode is called The Saphrax Protocol. We really see a number of the show and season's themes coalesce here. Things like the definition of family and defining your family relationships versus your own personal identity.
Your status in your career and your life goals and sort of different meanings of kind of maturity and success.
And a whole lot of Masons, the mysterious fraternal order blamed for a lot of wacky conspiracies and whose members included many of the founding fathers. And also Barbarella, the 1968 Roger Vadim movie. It's sort of a trippy, sexed-up space fantasy starring Jane Fonda, Anita Pallenberg, and Terence Stamp, based on the French comic by Jean-Claude Forest. It was actually the first widely sold sort of erotica comic, and you should definitely watch the movie. It's campy and sexy and completely batshit. I also recommend you you watch this episode of the TV show with the closed captioning, because there's some lines from Dragoon and Red Mantle that I had a hard time making out otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the downside with the sort of wacky old man voices, is that they're deliberately not particularly loud or intelligible. So we start the episode with a guild blackout team teleporting into Ventec Tower in a storage closet in the middle of the night.
And this is what they stole that device for. Not to get rich in the Silicon Valley way, but just so they could sneak into shit and save time traveling up to Force Majeure Meteor.
Yeah, and I kind of like how, one of the things I think that makes this season, we'll talk about this at the end of the episode, but like really cohesive is that, they just do a lot of kind of continuing themes and callbacks. So here we get, from episode 7, the unicorn in captivity, the whole, this is Dr. Venture's own teleporter that they stole and they're using against him. I also just love the helicoidal agony maneuver. It's just a really funny nonsense military term.
Well, there's like a helicarrier, right? I don't know. It is fun.
It is deliberately nonsense. Helicoidal means a surface in the form of a coil or screw.
Well, okay then.
What that has to do with agony or military maneuvers, I have no idea.
Okay, but it doesn't have anything to do with either the sun or coitus. Duly noted. The line that I actually went to put closed captioning on for was Dragoon or whatever saying, "We were going to pierce our ear like Jimmy from Roadhouse." And yeah, that's the thug in Roadhouse who beat everybody up with a pool cue. And I just recently watched that movie. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely sort of a classic. So Rusty wanders into the storage closet because they're making noise and gets teleported up to the Meteor Majeure in his tidy whities. And he's met by Watch and Ward, who are, pleasant to him, but then knock him out and order the team chief back to Ventec to secure Brock Sampson.
Good luck on that.
Yes. We also find out, as the Council of 13 assemble, that Dr. Phineas Phage is not there because he had a teleporter mishap. And apparently one of the downsides of the teleporter is if you have metal parts. And this is where we got what I was sure was going to be a twist at the end of the episode, but turned out to be a little bit of a fake out, although it might set up for next season, which is Brock has a metal plate in his chest. So that teleporter would be bad news for him if he goes through it.
Right, and he might not know that. That's interesting. I think there will be something about that eventually.
My other question, is llama bacon a thing?
No.
Okay. I mean, llamas are certainly a thing.
Yeah, and their floofs are very floofy.
Yeah, so the Council of 13 have dressed for the occasion. Some of them are in guild black and red robes. Dr. Mrs. is dressed up like a medieval shepherd, and Radical Left is dressed up like a princess in a video game. Like, I couldn't... like, it wasn't exactly Princess Peach, but it was that kind of thing with, like, that enormous heart jewel on his chest and the, like...
Yeah,
ermine
it kind of looked like... But also sort of
gown.
reminded me, like, of cards, like the queen as portrayed in, like, a traditional card
Oh, like
deck.
Queen of Hearts kind of thing.
Yeah. I would also just add that as a person who would much rather play a lot of the male roles in these things than the female ones, that it made me happy to see that they were having the guy play the princess, because, like, you can just do that. It's make-believe.
Yeah. And also there's like a, especially in a lot of these kind of secret society frat initiate, like, drag is a thing. You know, I mean, cultural historians and anthropologists, you know, talk a lot about this. Is all you know, officially sanctioned inversion. It's like, you know, in this special space you're allowed to do whatever and it's okay and it doesn't threaten your status. One of the things that is, you know, they mentioned one of the things that sort of like tipped me off. Candidates, they say the candidates are hoodwinked in the ritual space, and I noticed the plural. I have to admit I kind of overthought it a little bit. I thought that there was going to be like a thing where both Rusty and the Monarch were going to be offered something.
Oh.
But instead, you know, it was referring to the Monarch and 21.
Hoodwinking, like, I mean, there has to be some etymology of that word that's relevant here. Like everybody is sort of like hooded and in secrecy.
Thank you, OED. So, it comes from the mid-16th century, originally in the sense to blindfold, so literally hoodwinked, from the noun hood, i.e., you know, and an obsolete sense of wink as to close the eyes, so a hood closing the eyes.
And that's something we see in the symbolism of the actual clothes that they wear.
Yeah. So they discuss this as an important tenning. It's interesting that they use sort of tenning as, like, you know, an official term.
Yeah, it took me a second to realize that they were verbing it.
Yeah.
What levels has the Monarch been before?
So the Monarch, back when he had his giant floating cocoon and his army of henchmen and all that, was a 6. And then in season 6, when, like, he lost all of his money and, you know, most of his stuff got blew up on the Venture Brothers compound, he dropped down to being a 4. And over the course of season 6 and 7, he got back to being a 6 when Dean paid him off. I think he got up another rank for being a big villain to Augustus St. Cloud. So he's sort of, you know, speaking of this sort of topic of, like, status of in career and life goals, like, he's, you know, definitely sort of been Willy Lomaning this sort of vaunted status.
And it's just interesting to me because I feel like they've really grown the importance of these levels. It's been a huge point of this season and last. Yeah. And it seemed like he'd been in a much higher place earlier. Yeah, and was.
Yeah. So we then flash from there to Hank's dream sequence, where Hank is dressed up as Lando Calrissian, although because he is Hank, he has a giant letter H on his belt. And he is confronted by weird doll things from
Barbarella. They're like literally, even the blue doll that he says he's convinced is the leader of the dolls is literally in Barbarella when she lands in front of a couple of creepy kids who set their even creepier dolls with little metal teeth on to attack her.
Right, and this strikes me as like a Publick Hammer conversation about that scene in Barbarella. Just, you know, they're like, you could just knock them over. Why don't you do that? So Action Man shows up wearing what Hank thinks is a Chewbacca costume.
But he's actually Mark Hand from Barbarella, the character played by Ugo Tognazzi that this is interesting, that introduces Barbarella into the magic of sex. So that's sort of a character who you could associate with a coming of age in the Barbarella story. And Action Man plays the role of someone in this dream sequence who sort of helps Hank to grow up.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of sort of like different generations and growing up, like one of the interesting themes that's going on in Hank's whole storyline is it's about like these competing generations of science fiction. So, Hank like knows The Empire Strikes Back, doesn't know Barbarella, Action Man is vice versa. And like there's something here about like different generations of fandom, like our nostalgia for the stuff that we liked as kids, even if it was like a little bit more like even if it doesn't hold up on rewatch, but also just like all of this stuff using the hero's journey over and over and over again.
Totally.
And especially since the hero's journey is all about like growth and growing up, and it's all about a metaphor for maturity. So definitely something we're going to keep our eye on throughout the episode.
So they argue over whether or not heaven is The Empire Strikes Back, because obviously Hank is like, oh, heaven is The Empire Strikes Back, and I appreciate that Hank is convinced that he's in heaven. But Action Man has lived and seen a couple things, and he's like, oh no, I think we're in purgatory, and purgatory is Barbarella. I think Barbarella is probably heaven if you've seen it, because Jane Fonda is pretty amazing in that movie.
Right. And then we go to, what I think is kind of the weakest thread of the episode, which is, the blackout team leader, like, pops back into the closet to find that his men have all been killed, and, like, Brock Samson grabs his throat and does a thing with the voice box, and it's like, this is kind of, in some ways, kind of old hat. We have seen Brock murder minions in many, many, many times.
But it's also his calling, right?
Yeah.
Like, if this is about getting people to understand what is their ideal self, then this is probably his.
Yeah, Brock, the slayer of men, slayer of henchmen.
So, I guess my question is, like, the Guild Strike Force's competence level. It feels like these troops in some ways are more competent than the usual, but he takes them down nonetheless.
Yeah, well, you also get the sense from, like, watching Ward that it's like they're just there to be a roadblock. They're just there to buy time while the, ceremony happens. Speaking of which, then the ceremony starts.
Yes. Disclaimer, everything I know about the Masons is what I've gleaned by watching Matthew Barney's Cremaster cycle, an avant-garde series of art films produced over the course of the 90s that I highly recommend. But also, again, these are not traditionally narrative films, or things that I learned by going to a performance of Mozart's The Magic Flute back in grade school. And then pretty much, and I think this is for you as well, whatever the heck Alan Moore was on when he wrote From Hell. Yeah. So we are not experts at Masonic stuff. Yeah,
and specifically there's here it is. So one of the, like, his main Alan Moore's main sources for a lot of the, like, weird Masonic stuff is author Stephen Knight, who is a ripperologist. He wrote Jack the Ripper: The Final Solution, and basically tying this idea that, like, this graffiti that was written on the wall near like one of the Jack the Ripper murders had to do with the sort of mythology of the Masons.
Yeah. So basically we have a lot of literary and artistic references here, but not a great deal of historical diligence.
Yeah, as we will soon see, the history here is completely wonky. So the
So I thought it was maybe called Saphrax da Vincium was maybe the name of the role that in actual initiations for the Masons, like, this is not that far off from what people do. It's a lot of undramatic play acting of like these mythological archetypes.
Yeah, it's sort of ritual reenactment of a story. Yeah. And it's this is not just the Masons, this is also, the Carbonari in Italy did the same thing, the Illuminati, back when they were actually a thing in Bavaria were a thing. It's just like it's 18th century play acting, really. So the weird history gets involved. So the monarch plays the role of Saphrax Thervingian, which is not quite right. Saphrax and Alatheus were real people. They were Gothic co-chieftains who helped the Goths win the Battle of Adrianople against the Eastern Roman Empire. But Saphrax and Alatheus were Grethungian, not Thervingian. Which just sort of suggests that, like, the guild is kind of playing a little bit fast and loose with the history. Although Theophanes the Confessor was a real early medieval chronicler. The Foederati were foreign mercenaries working for the Roman Empire, although their level of eliteness varied. And it's also peculiar because Saphrax and Alatheus were not Foederati, as far as I could tell. They were very much, like, fairly straightforwardly enemies of Rome. So the kind of parallel here is that, in the Masonic rituals, the characters are reenacting this myth about this figure called Hiram Abif, the chief architect of the Temple of Solomon, who is assaulted by 3 ruffians who want the secrets of a master mason, which is also supposed to be a secret name of God. And the name of the 3 ruffians plays a big part in that theory that I was talking about from Stephen Knight about Masonic influence in the Jack the Ripper murders. So,
in the Cremaster movie, the role of Hiram Abif is played by minimalist sculptor Richard Serra.
Interesting.
I just think Saphrax and Alatheus are really fabulous sounding names.
Oh, like, yeah,
they're just right on the nose, right? Like, I feel like this aesthetically, like, that's what you would call them.
Yeah, they are very much like, they've got good sounds to both of them. So the first trial involves sticking your hand into a hollow log to find a stone.
Which I immediately thought about the Bene Gesserit from Dune and how they make you stick your hand into the box of pain, and if you recoil too quickly, you'll, like, be killed by the Gom Jabbar, which is the poison needle. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I love it. And to which my spouse was like, oh no, this is that scene from Lady Hawk. So apparently in Lady Hawk, there's, like, some log you have to put your hand in, and, like, Matthew Broderick's character, like, spins it rapidly. And
oh, that's why they were talking about Matthew Broderick. Okay, that makes sense.
And something comes out of the log. But actually, it's funny because...
Yeah, so, what I thought was funny about this is that the Monarch thinks that this is a Gordian knot style kind of lateral thinking challenge. And it turns out it's just fairly standard hazing that they want him to touch poop and then laugh at him.
Ew.
Yeah, it gets very, like, junior high.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, so meanwhile, Brock, dressed as a samurai, kills another minion, goes on this very overdramatic monologue, in large part because it seems like he's just bored. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a way for him to deal with his boredom.
When I saw him running around barefoot in sweatpants, I just was like, is this John McClane? And I definitely think that this whole, like, getting on the loudspeaker to make an announcement, like, that whole thing felt very 80s action movie to me overall.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate Brock thanking them for their service to, quote, your glorious service to this dumbass guild you joined. And, like, that's the most Brock thing ever. And he's doing it while, like, doing a self-aggrandizing speech.
Yeah.
Like, it's Brock at his most Brock.
I also like the bit where he's just, like, pissed off at Vatrid for not having a gun under the desk.
Yeah.
Because that is which is funny because it used to be a big character trait of Brock's that he never used guns.
Oh wow! I feel like they probably just forgot.
Yeah, or he's just changed his mind. So over at Stuyvesant University, quote unquote, medical center, Vatrid is failing to talk his way past the nurse.
It's painful to watch.
Yeah, but it does set up like a really important theme because he asks, he says, "I ask you, what is family?" And that's like kind of a running theme of this whole show, but especially this episode in this season.
And it's funny because as much as like the way Vatrid is hitting on the nurse at the front desk is disgusting, I do feel his pain. Like being kept from seeing a loved one at the hospital is really fucked up.
Yeah, and it's also, the one
and
thing
real.
that like, yeah, and the one thing that like in reflection makes the hitting on slightly less gross, I emphasize slightly, is that it's very instrumental. Like he's not doing this because he's like particularly turned on by the nurse. He is doing it to try to get into Hank's room.
Yeah, we just need to have a system for recognizing that there's other kinds of family structures in the world and giving people access to their loved ones in times of need.
Absolutely. So meanwhile, in the room, Dean is reading out his apology letter. So you thought that this was...
I feel like it's more of a confessional than an apology letter. Like he is expressing that he's sorry to his brother, but it's like, it's just the way he's listing it out. I think he's also just forcing himself to admit what he's done to himself.
Yeah. And what I like is that the first four things are like, again, they're sort of rooted in nostalgia and childhood, but are just like very ordinary things. Like he stole a whatchamacallit, which is
Candy bar,
crisped rice and chocolate. Okay.
I really want one now.
I've never been a huge fan. Blamed Brock. That's like a total sibling thing to do. Number 2, this is my favorite. He broke Hank's Bop It and doesn't regret it. And I think we've all been there with like some toy that had an annoying sound feature that just like whoever made it did not think about how often the song would actually get played and how irritating it would be.
Yeah. Oh God, do I relate? I used to take the batteries out of my brother's toys. Here's where you can tell that both Steven and I are older siblings.
Yes. So number 3 on the list and number 4 I think are like really hilarious. Dean secretly likes 98 Degrees despite having made fun of Hank for liking them. And number 4, he was the one who borrowed Hank's 98 Degrees CD. I think this happened. Not necessarily with 98 Degrees, but I think like growing up, this is definitely a thing where like you like something that you're not supposed to like, that it's not cool to like, and so you do this weird sort of double positioning.
Yeah.
And it's your guilty pleasure.
I stole my brother's Ozzy Osbourne solo album CDs.
This is a confessional album altogether. So meanwhile, back in Hank and Hank's dream, they argue about whether they're in heaven or purgatory. They argue about whether the thing that they're being pulled along by is a Minoc or what's the thing from Barbarella?
Yeah, I don't know it's like. They get carried, but they get pulled along by a manta ray-led sleigh while triumphant music plays in the background. That's like a reoccurring thing in Barbarella.
Yeah,
it's like do, and you're being pulled by a manta ray along a pool of ice.
Yeah, I guess the confusing thing is that like Minocs do look a bit like that thing. Like it's easy.
What's a Minoc?
It's from Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
The weird bat things that like stick onto the Millennium Falcon when they go into that cave mouth thing.
Okay.
So as they're arguing, Hank tells Action Man that they're not dead, that Action Man had a stroke back in arrears of science and is unconscious. And so now the question is, like, what's going on with Hank? So Hank doesn't remember initially what happened with Serena. And this is, like, again, a big theme of the episode is, like, coming to some revelations and how do you deal with those revelations. But the real big theme thing is that Action Man says that Hank is being a lot like his father Rusty, who got clingy and stalkerish with Hank's mom, the actress Bobby St. Simone, until she moved states, changed her name, and got a restraining order. And he's basically, like, you know, in terms of, like, telling him to grow up, he's sort of the super ego in a way. You know, sort of saying, you're not doing anything with your life, you know, so you're making everything about this relationship that really isn't that important.
Of course, who his mom is, you know, a legitimate point of issue. Like, have we heard about her before?
So, there's certainly been a lot of talk about Rusty's mom. I think they've mentioned Bobby St. Simone as, like, someone that Rusty is attracted to. We've never seen her, I think, because there was a scene in, I forget the name of the episode, but the one in which, like, they go inside Rusty's mind, and they end up talking to Rusty's id, and there's a whole bunch of women, like, on a rotating bed. And one of the women is, like, a blonde woman in a blue tracksuit. That might be Bobby St. Simone. I'm not entirely sure.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Her name definitely reminded me of Eva St. Marie, you know, the actress, so I at least most associate with North by Northwest.
Right. So we then, their conversation gets interrupted as they get jumped by a wampa.
I don't remember any wampas in Barbarella, so I'll let Star Wars take that one.
Yeah. So we then get back to Brock, who actually gets shot by a Blackout Squad guy, which is, like, it's rare that we see Brock actually get shot. And he gets pissed that the guy uses poison teeth rather than let Brock kill him.
Yeah. And so you go over and you see Watch and Ward on the Meteor Major, and they're talking about the blood test that they did, and they reveal
that the Monarch and Rusty are actually blood related.
Do you feel vindicated?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the whole fandom feels vindicated that, like, finally this thing that they've been speculating over for years and years and years is now, like, super duper confirmed and everyone knows about it.
And thematically, I really like it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, like, again, what is family, you know, and, you know, this, I think, gets back to, like, one of the running mysteries of the show, which is, like, what is the source of the vendetta between the Monarch and Rusty?
I'm also have to wonder why they gave him a blood test.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, is it for insurance purposes? Is it so that, like, you don't accidentally end up killing a relative that you didn't know about?
I guess that's what it was. Or, you know, I think, are they stealing a sample for future use? Hard to say.
Yeah, do they want to clone him? I mean, that's a big part of the superhero supervillain genre. So, as Peter Parker can unfortunately attest to.
Ooh, I don't want Kane to show up in season 9. That guy was just confusing.
Yeah, so we then go to the second trial, where the Monarch is carrying a goat and a chicken, who are symbolic of something.
I have thoughts.
Okay.
Sorry. You know, goats are often symbolized with fertility and randiness. And then chickens are delicious. Actually, so are goats. I'm not really sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, so he wants to cross a bridge that's guarded by the shepherd, played by Dr. Mrs. the Monarch. And I love the sort of, like, you know, school theater kind of thing of, like, you know, breaking character to be like, it's me! You're doing great! But also that, like, literally built into the ceremony is, like, a yo mama joke. And it's like a column response thing. So it's really kind of taking the piss out of all of this, you know, self-important ritual mumbo-jumbo.
And this is also when you have the blindfold lifted, which on Altheus when he comes, Altheus aka Gary, when he comes into the field of light. And of course, that's a symbolism in any ritual of enlightenment, entering the realm of the forbidden knowledge being shared with you and recognizing the world.
Yeah.
In its
Although
true state.
it's really funny because here it's tied to literally, like, Altheus helps Saphrax cross the bridge by pulling the first made you look.
Yes.
Like, all of this ritual and ceremony, you know, it's not even, like, villainy is too... This is, like, sub-villainy. This is, like, playground stuff. But, like, again, bringing that to the themes, we find out that, like, 21 has earned the right of a level 4 supervillain. And this really pisses off the Monarch. Like, he gets instantly jealous that, like, this is his special day. It's his birthday. Why aren't people paying attention to him? And Rusty stole his fire truck.
I mean, which he did.
Yes. But it just, like, you know, we definitely get the sense that, like, you know, the Monarch may be a couple decades older than Hank, but he is no more mature than Hank.
Oh, no, I mean, Rusty did steal his fire truck.
Yeah. Totally in agreement. So we then go back to the hospital, and this is where, like, the letter takes it up a notch, which is...
So good.
Number 57 is just, we stopped being close. And, like, Dean points out that, like, he's hidden a whole bunch of shit from Hank. Like, didn't tell Hank that Rusty was a clone, didn't tell Hank about the other helper, didn't tell him about Dermot, although that's kind of a mutual thing, because, like, Hank found out about Dermot first and then mind-wiped himself.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's the thing, like, I really loved this episode hitting this so much. I can't tell you what moment has been as gratifying as this for me emotionally in a long time. Really, for me, honestly, one of the top moments emotionally on the show is, like, them recognizing how they have separated. And the thing is, it's sort of as this meta thing, because in the beginning of the show, their personalities were basically the same. They were the same character as each other. And over time, the show realized it would be more interesting if they started to have the two characters of Dean and Hank differentiate more. And then the characters began to do this between each other in terms of having their own plot lines and storylines, in addition to the fact that their personalities were more defined from each other. And what's interesting is, like, I really think that the reason why Dean started hiding things from Hank was to solidify his own identity. He wanted to have some knowledge that was just his, and some understanding of the world that was just his. And he, you know, he does think of his brother as being less mature than him, which is true.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think his decision not to talk about these things is because he wanted to have something to himself.
Yeah. But, you know, at the same time, we get, like, I think a certain ambivalence about maturity, because the next item on his list is that he's jealous that Hank isn't embarrassed about dressing up as Batman in public. And I think this gets to the whole question of, like, what is maturity? What is the point of growing up if it means, you know, on the one hand, like, putting aside childish things. Yeah, we all understand that to be a part of maturity. But on the other hand, like, is that better than, you know, just admitting that you like the things that you like and that you're not going to be embarrassed about it because it's not adult?
Yes, yes. It's sort of like how a lot of people go through a phase where they don't let themselves watch children's cartoons anymore. And then once they're an adult, they're like, oh, I can like this. That's fine. Personally, I never stopped watching kids' cartoons, but I've seen this about the rest of you.
Yeah, and especially in a show that's literally about, like, you know, adults in their, like, 40s who are still playing at superheroes and supervillains. Like, it's a big question about, like, which is the right way forwards? Is it to give up all this shit because it's not real and, you know, it's ultimately kind of pointless and doesn't go anywhere? Or is it to be like, no, you like the things that you like, and, you know, you're being true to yourself by liking them?
So real.
Yeah. So we go from there to Hank's dream, where they're in the Upside Down Cave, part of The Empire Strikes Back, which, again, that's, like, big, Hero of a Thousand Faces stuff. It's like, you know, the cave where you see visions that tell you, where you're in danger, but you survive danger, and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love is that, like, Hank immediately goes to, like, D&D Bard move number 1, which is seduce the Wampa.
He's thinking, what would Lando do?
Yeah.
And that is what Lando do. He would seduce the Wampa and sell you out to the Empire.
Right. And they then are all of a sudden saved by Dr. Phineas Phage because he...
Yep.
Yeah, sorry.
Because he was in a coma from the transporter accident, as referenced earlier in the episode.
Right. And now, I guess either because of the weird genre rules of this place or whatever happened to him in the godforsaken transporter accident, his lower half is an AT-AT, and he has wings from Barbarella.
Yes. He's like Pygar, the alien, and the angel from Barbarella. Pygar in the movie is super hot. Phage is less so. But his voice actor, James Adomian, is amazing in this episode. I really was just like, he is nailing it here. I'm actually a big fan of James Adomian as a stand-up as well. His George W. Bush impersonation is legendary. He played him in like the Harold and Kumar movie. I've seen him live. He does the Sam Elliott. That's amazing. And he also just his comedy is amazing. He has this bit about successfully picking up a guy in jail. Like, definitely check out James Adomian if he's comes to your town, or look him up on YouTube. Last name is Adomian.
Okay. So we then go back to the ritual where and this is where we find out why Radical Left was in drag, is that he's playing the wife of Flavius, who Saphrax supposedly seduces. And what's strange about this is that Flavius Julius Valens is the Roman emperor who Saphrax defeated the Battle of Adrianople. He died on the battlefield. Like, that's what made the Battle of Adrianople a big deal, is that, like, a Roman emperor was killed on the battlefield by barbarians. And it sort of signified the sort of decline of the empire. And here there's, like, this weird myth that's all about, like, cuckolding and... weird role-playing.
It's 2018.
Yeah, so... yeah. So Dr. Z gives him a real sword to use on his real enemy.
In this ritual space, which is space, anything can happen. Which I just loved that because, they are doing this in space at their headquarters, but it also is a space where they can invent the world as they want it to be. And this is their collective fantasy.
Yeah. And what I think is really cool about this choice that they give him is, like, it kind of cuts to, this whole thing that they've been talking about with sort of organized villainy, which is like, okay, we know that, from a meta perspective, right? The reason why, the Joker keeps, escaping from jail and Batman, doesn't kill him and so on and so forth. In addition to the fact that these are fundamentally books for kids and, heroes should not be murdering people, is that, like, these are valuable IPs that you want to keep going. You don't want to have to invent a new villain every month because that's how you get the Condiment King. Or my favorite version, which is like the Marvel version of this, which is, Jack Kirby is way behind on deadlines and just starts looking out the window or like on his desk for like, shit, what can I come up with? Okay, there's a construction site across the street. Boom, we get the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
That's how it goes sometimes.
I
but
love
it's
them
like
so
it's
much.
this great thing of like, what is the, again, like both within genre or without, like, what is maturity, right? Is it like putting an end to this relationship that has defined you your entire career, or it's like, no, let's keep this going because this is what I'm about.
Right. I like how you put it in the notes, which is scot-free murder or continue the grudge.
Yeah.
And one of these things is much more on brand than the other.
Yeah. The Monarch has been known to do both, though. I mean, that is
True.
what happened with Dr.
But
Dugong.
he's killed people in the service of getting to menace Dr. Venture.
That is true. And, I mean, in addition to the weird thing with Saphrax, like, there's a whole psychosexual dimension to Rusty and the Monarch that goes, like, way beyond just the normal weirdness of, like, Batman Joker level stuff. But anyway, so we haven't
really talked about that much. Maybe there'll be a good space for that from the next season.
It's been a couple seasons. Like, we're a long way away from back when the Monarch had sex with a robot with Rusty's face on it.
Oh, God, that's right.
He missed him so much.
That's a thing that happened. Interesting. Okay.
So we then go to the...
Oh, yes, the pee break.
Yeah, which is just like, okay, it's a kind of a funny moment. It doesn't really go anywhere. But it does, like, explain, like, so why hasn't Brock come to save the day yet? Well, even bodyguards need to pee. So we then go back to the hospital, and Vatrid has taken off his... Oh, sorry. Is trying to... I got ahead of myself. Is hitting on the nurse. Which, I'm generally not a fan of any of Vatrid's expressions of sexuality in this show.
And we are back in time to hear the key item on that list from Hank.
Number 124, I slept with Serena. And, this was something where I wanted to sort of take your temperature on, which is, he says he doesn't know why he did it. He doesn't love her, and he misses when it was just the two of them, which suggests that it's more sort of, this was a little bit of Dean acting out to try to sort of provoke a response from Hank.
Yeah. I
don't know. Do you think it's better that, it's not a love triangle thing? Or...
Yes. Yeah, totally. Okay. I mean, I do think there's the legitimate point you raised before, which is that, Dean and Serena have a lot more in common in some ways. But yeah, I ultimately think that this is about his relationship with his brother, and also just, they're horny college students.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate, I don't want this to be some deep rivalry between them over a girl. That's not, she wouldn't want that either. And I think that would be a much less interesting story.
Yeah. And, it is really interesting that, again, getting back to this idea of, maturity and identity, for all that Dean is in some ways the more grown up of the two, he's going to college, he's trying to find a space for himself outside of super science, etc. He does kind of want to go back to the way he was in season 1.
Because it was simpler and easier. Yeah, I love it. He says, I miss when it was just us, no Jareds, and just Grandpa talking to us in our sleep. I'm like, oh God, no, this is true. He's scared of where he's moved to right now at this phase in his life, and wouldn't it be easier to just regress in some ways? And then he says, I always liked your hair, which, so many kids who are natural redheads grew up thinking that their hair was awkward and wanting to be blonde. I, not a natural redhead, have nevertheless observed this in others.
So, we also get the sort of, we came into the world it's like the opposite of we go into the world alone, we die alone. Especially for the Venture Brothers, both because they're twins, they're clones, they've died so many times, usually together, and he doesn't want to go on alone.
It's beautiful, really. He's we came into this world together, and he wants Hank to come back to him.
Yeah. So we then cut to the dream. There's a brief joke about different strokes and actual strokes.
And then they go to talk about, which of course the other characters have not seen, because why would they be watching that? I love that they're then discuss, they specifically went out of their way to find the Matmos from Barbarella.
Right.
Which is also when they get saved by Pygar flying around. But yeah, so they're trying to define what is the Matmos. He's like, it's a weird lake. And what is the contents? Nobody really quite understands it. But in the movie, it's described as an energy that surrounds everything, to which, of course, Hank says, like the Force? And I feel like the Force is in a lot of ways much clearer than the Matmos, because I don't think he was on as many drugs. But sure. And it is an interesting, they both could be described the same way. And they're both
I think they were into different drugs, because, George Lucas really had his cocaine phase. But...
you're right.
Certainly probably less hallucinogens, I think.
Yes. But I love that but the whole bit about like, oh, so it's not necessary to the plot. Oh, like metachlorians. Like that whole sequence of dialogue there that we just butchered is fucking amazing.
Yeah. This is some of the like best like interlacing, multi-layered pop culture shenanigans.
Like, this episode is just like everything we love about the show.
Yeah, and we then get this interesting question. Like again, this topic of maturity is like, is Hank jumping into the Force to like save them all growing up, or is like mortgages, children, and enlarged prostates growing up? Like, you know, this is kind of interesting.
There's also a lot of Jungian stuff in here that we've been talking about, but particularly jumping into the lake, like the lake being a Jungian symbol for the mirror of self-reflection, which is like literally what he's doing, and he's going into the unconsciousness to emerge to the other side.
Yeah, and it's also like this is pure Hero of a Thousand Faces stuff. Like Hank is dying and being reborn. He's undergoing apotheosis. Like he is becoming the greater self that he, you know, always had the potential to be all along. You know, he's saving them all and possibly dying or whatever. And he also has his realization that like his girlfriend slept with his brother. So like that's his grand realization about the nature of the universe.
Right. It's something which is very concrete that just happened to him. Like, rather than focusing on these fantasies, he's like recognizing, oh, I remember the thing that just happened to me in the real world.
Right. And although another potential realization comes from Dr. Phage, who says that kid has undiagnosed ADHD. Which, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, given the way that we've seen Hank, you know, operate in the past.
Totally.
So we then cut back to the hospital where Vatrid has finally taken off his shirt. Apparently he had the tattoo removed.
I think they just forgot.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's a bit of a pain in the ass to animate. So Dean tries to get Vatrid to go away.
But for the sake of propriety, like it's not that he doesn't want Vatrid there to support him. He really feels how much Vatrid cares. He just wants Vatrid to stop like bothering the nurse.
Yeah, and what's also kind of interesting is that like the person who isn't there is Rusty. Now, Dean doesn't obviously know that his father's been kidnapped, but like it kind of
doesn't seem surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not
Nobody's surprised that his dad isn't there.
Yeah. So we're sort of barreling towards the end of the episode. Watch and Ward decide to go tell about the secret that they've learned because Brock is preparing to take the teleporter. And this is like, oh, I thought Brock was going to go through, but maybe not yet. And the Monarch decides to go through, not to go through with it because he doesn't want to start again alone. And like, you know, like initially telling the guild to go fuck themselves. Like it's interesting because like he's finally gotten the brass ring, right? The thing that he's been fighting for seasons. But like at the same time, all of his frustrations about the guild are just crystallizing, and especially where he says, you know, you took my wife, and now you're gonna take my best friend. And like Gary decides at the same time, like he's kind of rejecting this upward mobility narrative. He sort of says, look, I don't want to have to start again on my own. I want to, like, I don't have a crazy grudge. Like, I don't have, I guess, he's sort of given up on the whole, Henchman 24 revenge thing. He's just in it to be with his best friend. And that's really kind of heartwarming.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is sort of the decision not to kill Rusty. It's sort of a deflation and of tension that is mirrored, I think, in the marriage episode, where you feel like they're the trial. You know, when you think he's going to be like tested, him versus Dr. Girlfriend, and in the end, it's like, oh, you guys are the perfect couple. I'm going to marry you guys. And so this is very much in line with how the show resolves tension.
Yeah,
I feel like at some point, though, I'm going to need the show to get to a moment of actual final conflict. And yeah. I'm fine with this not being that. But I'm expecting it eventually.
Yeah, well, I was especially going to say, like, after the guild says, like, oh, it's all a final test, you pass, congratulations.
The moral is doing it together is better.
Yeah, like, watching Ward come in and tell them, and we don't get to see it. Like, they're denying us catharsis. Like, we get the nice bit where you sort of, you gotta be kidding me from outside the meteor. But, we don't get to sort of see him finding out, and we don't see any
or Rusty's face, yeah.
Yeah, we don't see any of the fallout from that. So I guess, that's a good setup for the, like, is next season supposed to be the last? Is that the word?
Probably. I think so.
Okay, I don't know if it's been announced, but, like, in terms of, like, getting to that final confrontation, it's like, okay, now everybody knows everything. Now we can, have it out. And then we get, like, a really great after credits bit where we get the classic, hospital fake out that Hank is gone. He's not dead. He's just jumped out of his hospital bed.
And then we cut to see Hank on the street giving a voiceover narration, which I would not have caught in a million years. But as we're watching it, my husband turns immediately to me and it's like, Darkman. He is literally reciting the closing monologue from Darkman.
I thought 100%
we went to
it was
watch
Batman.
It. No, it's the closing monologue from Darkman when he disappears into the crowd.
Ah.
I mean, maybe it also happens in Batman, but like we rewatched that scene from Darkman.
Gotcha.
No, that's literally how it ends.
Yeah, it's probably word for word almost.
Like, wait, from Batman?
No, I was going to say from Darkman.
Yeah, no, from Darkman. He's walking away into the crowd, and she thinks that she sees him, but it's really a man that looks like him and not actually her ex-husband or whatever it is. Like, that whole sequence is literally from Darkman. But, of course, Hank decides to grow up by being Batman.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting. Like, that, again, a very ambivalent statement, right? In some ways, this is Hank reverting to, past behavior and, like, this kind of the most immature thing possible. But at the same time, like, this is the thing that Dean envied most about his brother, is that, like, Hank is gonna be 100% Hank and he doesn't give a shit what anyone thinks about it.
Yeah, I wonder if it's setting up that maybe his future is he's going to be another, like, protagonist in, like, the Guild versus OSI / whatever good guy organizations there are type structure.
Yeah,
he
maybe.
wants to be a superhero.
So that brings us to the end of the season.
What a season. I love it.
Yeah.
There was really only like one episode that I feel like was a letdown, and it wasn't even like bad. It was just not that great. I just think that this season has really seen the show be a force, of what we've wanted. There have been so many amazing moments of character development, comedy, references, beautiful art, full of New York City-ness. This final episode of the season is really a perfect capstone to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, in terms of, like, any complaints I've heard about this season, I think there are things that are really going to disappear once this is something that people primarily encounter on DVD or streaming or whatever. Mm-hmm. Because, to me, like, season 6 and 7 flow together very well. We were talking about this early in the season about, like, the whole thing that, the first, 3 episodes of season 7 are really the finale of season 6. But, I think this has been an amazing season. I mean, the level of writing is just astonishing. So, thumbs up.
The production values, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. In terms of the upcoming season, I know you mentioned before, like, oh God, is Dr. Mrs. pregnant? And I really hope she isn't, but thinking about it longer, I think she probably is.
Yeah, and I could see it sort of fitting into the whole, like, thing about, generations and legacy and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I just hate the trope of, like, women getting pregnant with, like, not having had a conversation with their partner. That's not really a thing that happens.
Explicitly having had a conversation that was the reverse.
Yeah. Oh, like, yeah, you're right.
That was episode 1, is we both said we were people who don't want children.
Wow.
So, who knows?
Yeah, I just, like, I feel like do I think that Dr. Mrs. would go and have a kid if the monarch didn't want to? Yeah. But would she have it without having a conversation about that? Like, that's just not, no, I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah.
So that's something I expect to have happen. Any other predictions for the next season?
I mean, I think, my main prediction is I think we're going to get to the whole theme of, like, brothers and, like, what is the vendetta between the Monarch and Rusty all about?
I suppose it's like, what has he been missing all this time? I mean, I guess that's not true, actually. I was about to say what he's been missing all this time is having a brother, but that's not true. He did have a brother. He had Jonas Jr. But that's what the Monarch has been missing.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's what we're going to get to.
Well, thank you again for doing this podcast with me. I'm excited to do Season 8 with you when the time comes, and hopefully I'll have you back on Graphic Policy Radio to talk about some piece of popular culture in the near future, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And in the meantime, you can always check out Graphic Policy at graphicpolicy.com. You can find me on Twitter all the damn time at ELANA_Brooklyn. And Steven.
You can find me at Stephen Atwell on Twitter. You can also find me at Race for the Iron Throne on Tumblr and WordPress.
You have another big essay coming out?
Let me see. So, at the moment, I'm trying to get to halfway through A Storm of Swords. But Martin's new book, Fire and Blood Volume 1, is like coming out in 10 days. So that's going to be a lot of content I'm going to have to work through.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to read it. Like, you're like the guy on A Song of Ice and Fire. So,
oh, thank you.
It's a fact. It's how I know you also. So thanks, you guys. And I'll leave you with the final sign off for this season of the show.
Okay. Count us down?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Go Team Venture Brothers Podcast.
Jeez.
Yay!
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.